Hello everyone, welcome to our Economist Adventure. We are 5 students from NCCU. Under the initiative of Teacher Jack, we decided to lead everyone to understand economics through 5 simple economics questions. I'm Bernard Su, major in business administration. Let's start by question 1. Interest rates, inflation, and exchange rate dynamics, a comprehensive analysis of the US, Taiwan, and Japan. The United States has suffered from inflation problems since 2023. Therefore, it has continued to increase the interest rates. The federal rate has been between 2.25 to 5.5% since July 2023. In early 2024, Taiwan also suffered from an inflation problem. Therefore, Central Bank of Taiwan unexpectedly increased its key discount rate to 2% in March. The Japanese economy, which has faced deflationary pressure, has been seeing indications of healthy inflation in recent months. As a result, the Bank of Japan raised interest rates to 0.05% in March 2024, ending the country's historical era of negative interest rates. So what happened? There has been a big gap in interest rates between the US and Asian countries such as Japan and Taiwan. Therefore, there has been capital inflow from Asian countries to US, and net capital outflow of the US has been decreased. As a result of net capital outflow of US decrease, the US dollar has been appreciated, while Japanese yen and New Taiwan dollars has been depreciated. On April 29, the nominal exchange rate once went up to 160 Japanese yen per US dollar. However, Central Bank of Japan tried to intervene foreign currency exchange markets in Tokyo on that day. As a result of intervention, the nominal exchange rate went down to 155 Japanese yen per US dollar in the end of that day. To help you understand how these events occurred, let me first introduce you to what the federal funds rate is. Federal funds rate is the interest rate at which depository institutions such as banks and credit units lend reserve balance to other depository institutions overnight. Now let's think about why has federal funds rate has been kept at a very high level in the US. Well, the purpose of this is to combat high inflation. When the federal funds rate keep at a very high level, it makes borrowing more expensive and then reduce customer spending and investment. This approach helps to reduce the inflation rate and ensure economic stability. The second thing you should know is what discount rate is. The discount rate is the interest rate charged by the Federal Reserve to commercial banks and other depository institutions for short-term loans. It serves as a backup source of funding for banks to help ensure liquidity in the banking system. Then, why the Central Bank of Taiwan increased its discount rate to deal with the inflation problem in March? Let's think about it step by step. When Central Bank of Taiwan increased the discount rate, it decreased the money supply. As shown in this graph, when the money supply decreased, the curve shifts to the left. This caused the value of money increase and the price of level decreases. This helps reducing the inflation problem in Taiwan. Now we can do the third thing. What is real exchange rate? The real exchange rate is a measure that compares the relative price level of basket of goods between two countries, adjusted for the nominal exchange rate. It helps determine the true value of one country's currency against another, taking into account inflation and purchasing power parity. The formula of real exchange rate is nominal exchange rate times domestic price and then divided by foreign price. So why capital flows have caused real exchange rates to rise in the US? For this question, we will need to open macroeconomics model. In this open macroeconomy model, there are 3 sub-models: the non-normal funds markets, the net capital outflow, the US foreign currency exchange markets. Why capital flows have caused the exchange rates to rise in the US? As shown in the graph, when the net capital outflow of US decrease, the demand curve of nominal funds markets shift to the left. Also, the net capital outflow curve in the second graph also shifts to the left. With these changes, the real interest rates of US decreases. With the decrease of net capital outflow, the supply curve of US for foreign currency exchange markets shifts to the left, leading a real exchange rate increases. We come to the last one. What is nominal exchange rate? The nominal exchange rate is the rate at which one currency can be exchanged for another currency in the foreign exchange market. It represents the relative value of one currency against another and is often called as the amount of one currency required to buy a unit of another currency. This is the diagram for Tokyo's foreign currency exchange market. The vertical axis is Japanese yen per US dollar, whereas the horizontal axis is quantity of the US dollar. The supply curve is affected by export, foreign investments, international tourists, foreign exchange, and foreign students. The demand curve is affected by import, invest abroad, travel abroad, study abroad. In the previous section, we know the Central Bank of Japan tried to intervene foreign currency exchange markets in Tokyo. But how? Let's suppose that the initial equilibrium nominal exchange rate was 150 Japanese yen per US dollar on April 28th. The continuous capital outflow from Japan will cause foreign investment decreases. Then the supply curve will shift to the left. As a result, nominal exchange rates raised to 160 Japanese yen per US dollar on April 29. So how Central Bank of Japan pulled the nominal exchange rates down in the end of that day? According to our description in the beginning, we know Central Bank of Japan raised the interest rates, which leads net capital outflow decreases, foreign investments increases, and the supply curve shifts to the right. As you can see, when the supply curve shifts to the right, the nominal exchange rates will go down to 155 Japanese yen per US dollar. And that's the answer of the question. Hope today's questions help you to get more familiar to the economies.
我是创国一的陈雨柔。The question I will like to talk about is the black swans in China. Since 2019, China's economy has suffered from threats of several black swans. First, there has been trade war between USA and China. Second, foreign companies have continued to leave China since the COVID-19 pandemic period. Third, China has been experiencing a real estate crisis with the collapse of giants like Evergrande and Country Garden. Lastly, China's stock market hit new 5-year low. So the first question is that how can trade war between USA and China influence the aggregate demand in China? To answer the first question, we should know what is aggregate demand first. According to the definition from textbook, the aggregate demand curve shows the quantity of goods and services that households, firms, and the government want to buy at each price level. In the other word, the aggregate demand can be described by the 4 components of GDP. After understanding what aggregate demand is, let's take a look at what happened during the trade war between the US and China. According to the BBC report, the US imposed significant tariffs on China, and since the US is China's largest export market, it led to a decrease in China's net export. Then the aggregate demand curve shifts to the left. Next, the trade war between the US and China led to foreign companies withdrawing from China. What impact will this have on China's aggregate demand? The departure of foreign companies caused a decline in FDI, leading to a decrease in investment in GDP. Therefore, the aggregate demand curve also shifts to the left. How can the real estate crisis infect the aggregate demand in China. First, the wealth effect, decline in property values. As real estate prices fall, the wealth of property owners decreases. The decline in wealth can lead to reduced consumer spending, as people feel less financially secure and may choose to save more instead of spending. Reduced investment. Investors who have lost money in real estate may cut back on spending in other areas, further reducing aggregate demand. Construction activity. Job losses. A slowdown in construction can lead to job losses in the sector, reducing income and thus consumption for those affected. Reduction in construction. The real estate sector is the significant part of the economy, and a crisis can lead to a substantial reduction in construction activity, this decline reducing the demand for construction materials, labors, and related services. Third, financial sector in banking sector stress. Real estate companies often take large loans from banks. If these companies default, banks may face significant losses, leading to tighter credit conditions. Credit crunch. Banks, in response to rising non-performing loans, may reduce leading to consumer and businesses, leading to a decline in consumption and investment. Fourth, confidence and expectations. For consumer confidence, a real estate crisis can undermine consumer confidence, leading people to spend less due to fear of economic instability. And for business confidence, similarly, businesses may delay or reduce investment due to uncertainties and a pessimistic economic outlook. How will these black swans on China affect its real GDP and overall price? As we mentioned above, the aggregate demand curve will shift to the left, so the point will move from A to B. But when the expected price decreases, the wage will also decreases, and the cost of producing goods and services will decreases. Then the firms will allow to produce more goods and services. So the point B will move back to the natural rate of quantity of output. And also, because the changes in natural resources and changes in technology didn't happen, so in the long run, the quantity of output is unchanged. But this situation is not good for China's citizens because the economy faced the inflation and regression. So the Chinese government need to do something to improve the situation. So first, it can conduct some official policies, such as increase infrastructure investment, because investing in infrastructure projects can create jobs, stimulate economic growth, and improve the long-term foundation of the economy. This type of spending can help offset the demand shortfall caused by a weakened real estate market, and also the tax reductions and increased subsidies reducing the tax burden on individuals and businesses, along with increasing subsidies for low-income groups, can directly enhance consumption capacity and business investment willingness, thereby boosting aggregate demand. Support for small and medium-sized enterprises, providing loans, tax relief, and other fiscal support to medium-sized enterprises can help them weather the crisis, maintain employment, and prevent excessive economic downturns. Also, expand social security, strengthening social security measures such as unemployment insurance and health care can reduce the economic pressure on residents and increase their consumption capacity. Lastly, central bank can also conduct some monetary policies in response to this short-run economic fluctuation. Firstly, lower interest rates. Reducing interest rates can lower borrowing costs for businesses and individuals, encouraging investment and consumption, thereby increasing economic activity. Second, reducing reserve requirements. Lowering the reserve requirement ratio can increase the amount of funds banks can lend, enhancing their lending capacity, and further stimulating economic activity through increased credit. And lastly, provide liquidity support through open market operation and other measures. Injecting liquidity into the market can ensure the stable operation of the financial system and prevent the chain reaction caused by liquidity shortages. So, there are the monetary policy. I recommend the central bank response to these black swans. Yes.
And here comes to question 3. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the European Union adopted a number of sanctions in an attempt to immobilize the war effort. One sanction was complete import ban on all Russian seaborne crude oil and petroleum products. This sanction sent energy prices to historic high. And we can look at the graph to see why the sanction caused the energy price to rise sharply. Since it is a change in the availability of natural resource, so it will shift the aggregate supply curve. It will shift the aggregate supply curve to the left because it is a band. And as we can see in the graph, the price will therefore rise. So in the short run, this sanction will make EU's overall price higher and output falls and unemployment rise. When there's a phenomenon of output falls and price rise, it is called a stagflation. To address inflation, fiscal policy could be used involving increased government spending and tax cuts. This would boost demand and counteract the supply shock, stabilizing the prices. For a recession, the EU authority could implement expansionary monetary policy by lowering the interest rates or increasing the money supply. Borrowing and spending could rise, therefore stimulating the demand and potentially reducing the unemployment. Could EU use single policy to simultaneously solve both inflation and recession? The answer is that the authority cannot offset both problems simultaneously. Policymakers who can influence aggregate demand can mitigate the adverse impact on output, but only at the cost of exacerbating the problem of inflation. And why is that? Because when the short-run aggregate supply fall, it shifts to the depth, and the policymakers can accommodate the shift by expanding aggregate demand curve. It will shift the aggregate demand curve to the right, which causes the price level to rise even further, but it keeps the output at its natural level of output.
我是教育2的黄燕宇。 Next, I'm going to talk about QE policy. In the past decade, the quantitative easing policy was often used by the major economics like USA, Japan, and EU to deal with this recession problem. These economics could no longer use conventional monetary policy to lower the short-term interest rate due to the liquidity trap in money market. Therefore, they choose to use the quantitative easing policy to lower the long-term interest rate. The main goal was to stimulate the economic by increasing aggregate demand. Question 1. Use a graph of money market to explain why an increase in money supply cannot lower short-term interest rate, suggesting the existence of liquidity trap. In normal conditions, an increase in money supply shifts the MS curve to the right, leading to a lower interest rate and a higher quantity of money in circulation. A liquidity trap occurs when interest rates are very low, yet consumers prefer to hoard cash rather than spend or invest their money in higher yielding bonds or other investments. In such cases, the main tool used by the central bank has failed to be effective, which means the interest rate doesn't fall any further. Question 2. What is quantitative easing policy? What is the difference between quantitative easing policy and conventional monetary policy? Quantitative easing is used by the monetary authorities to further stimulate the economy by purchasing assets for a longer maturity than only short-term government bonds, and thereby lowering longer-term interest rates. Let's compare conventional monetary policy with QE policy. Conventional monetary policy is targeted to lower the short-term interest rate by purchasing short-term government bonds when the economy is in a normal condition, while the QE policy is targeted to lower the longer-term interest rate by purchasing long-term government bonds, such as mortgage-backed security, when the short-term interest rate is really low or at zero. Question number 3. Please introduce the quantitative easing policy adopted by USA between 2008 and 2014. During the Great Recession, the US Federal Reserve used quantitative easing to boost the economy, increasing its balance sheet with various assets. By 2017, US bank reserves exceeded $4 trillion, intended to stimulate lending and economic growth. However, banks held on to $2.8 trillion in excess reserves. In 2020, the Fed launched a $700 billion QE program in response to COVID-19 economic crisis. By 2022, facing rising inflation, the Fed shifted to raising interest rates and reducing assets holding to control inflation. Question number 4. Explain why the quantitative easing policy could increase aggregate demand. There are 3 main factors. First, lowering the interest rate. Cheaper borrowing encourages spending and investment. Second, raising asset prices. Higher asset values create a wealth effect, increasing consumption and investment. Third, weakening currency. A weaker domestic currency makes export more competitive. These factors collectively support economic growth and help the economic recover from recession or slow growth period. Question number 5. Use appropriate model to show how quantitative easing policy will shift the aggregate demand curve and influence output and overall price of economic. Graphical and descriptive analysis are required. So the QE policy shift the AD curve to the right from AD to AD plus. And this leads to a higher output and a higher price level, as the graph shows.
And now I'm going to talk about question number 5, the Trumponomics versus Biden's economic policies. And I'm Hong Weilun from Xinli Yi. And this is the question. So first of all, we're going to explain the differences between the supply side economics and the demand side of economics. And I divided them into 3 parts: the primary focus, the taxation, and the effects. So first of all, supply side economics, which is often associated with the Republican Party and Reagan economics. It emphasized that tax cut for business and high-income individuals to increase production and investment. And it supposed that economic growth is driven by increasing the supply of goods and services. So it will actually affect and then shift the supply curve. And on the other hand, demand side economics, which the Democratic Party and Keynesian economic advocates, it mainly focuses on tax cuts for the lower and middle class in order to boost consumer spending. And according to the theory, the economic growth is stimulated by increasing demand for goods and services. And now we're going to talk about the effects. The effect supply side economics promotes that long-term growth through increased productivities, business expansions, and job creation. However, it may also lead to increased inequality as the benefit primarily favor the wealthy people. However, the demand side economics stimulates short-term growth by raising demand, which in turn creates jobs as well. And it aims to reduce income inequality through redistribution policies and higher government spending on public services. As for problem 3, we're going to talk about the impact of Trump's tax cut on the market for loanable funds. The Trump's tax cuts influenced the market for loanable funds in several ways. The real interest rate increased due to higher demand for loanable funds, and the net capital outflow decreased as higher domestic interest rates attract more investment within the country. Thirdly, the real exchange rate appreciated because of the higher interest rates drew foreign capital, increasing the demand for dollars. And lastly, the trade balance is worsened, and it is reduced as the appreciation of dollars made exports less competitive. And now I'm going to use the graphical analysis to help you understand. So because tax is reduced to increase domestic investment, which shift the demand curve of the market for loanable funds to the right, and since the demand curve represents domestic investment plus NCO, and the increase in the demand of loanable fund actually raises the interest rate, we can see that the equilibrium point actually moved from A to B, as the real interest rate moved from R1 to R2 as well. And moving to the net capital outflow, the NCO decreases due to the raise in the real interest rate, and pointing that it attracts more investment domestically. Lastly, for the market for foreign currency exchange, because the supply curve equals to the net capital outflow, and the NCO decreases, so we can see that S1 actually shift left to S2, and which in turn raised the real exchange rate as well. And moving on to problem 4, the high tariff was implemented under Trump's tariff policy. In the market for foreign currency exchange, a real exchange rate appreciates as high tariff is not good for the import, and thus demand curve shift right. In the market for foreign currency exchange, demand curve equals to the net export, which is also means export minus import. So the demand curve shift right in this case. And however, trade balance is not affected because after the appreciation, it is beneficial to the import and not good for the export. So this phenomenon actually offsets the initial increase in the net export. And now moving to the last problem, problem 5, the opposition to the Trump's tariff policy. As we know that many economists oppose that Trump's tariff policies, and here I summarize the 3 main reasons why they might argue about. First, the appreciation of the dollars doesn't necessarily improve the trade balance, and we can solve the result in problem 4. And secondly, higher tariff could potentially increase the production cost for businesses, and which is not good for the domestic industry. And lastly, retaliatory measures from countries like China could also decrease US export, which is not good for the economic growth for the US.